Hello and welcome to another video. In today's video we will be continuing with the engine work on our Cub Cadet original. Now if you've watched the previous video you'll know that towards the end we found a few things that we weren't expecting to find. So some of the stuff that we found last time includes, when we took the head off, there appears to be new valves, which is not a good sign seeing as there's quite a big valve gap on one of those, which is not helpful, and it doesn't look like it's been run much since those were put in. So we'll have to see what we're going to do about that. Behind the flywheel, when we uncovered all the ignition system and did plenty of testing, we believe the coil is the issue with the ignition system, which is not a problem. We've already got a new one of those. Spark plug boot has also had it from some testing we did, but the rest of the HT lead should be reusable, hopefully. So that's what we need to replace on the ignition system and then test it again. The backing plate, as we'd shown you in the past, you can see one of the bolt kind of lobes has cracked off, probably from the stress of the recoil pull start, but that does mean that if we ran it as it is, they'll be putting more stress on the other lobes there, and it's not really what we want to be doing. So we need to replace this, and we did have this backing plate that we bought as a replacement. However, having cleaned it up since the last video, we noticed this damage up here, which looks like it's either been hit or had some like force against it. Maybe it had been levered against to try and pull the flywheel off of the engine that it was on in the past. You can see that's actually pushed through the other side, so we're really not happy about that. I mean, it's usable, but it's still not great. I mean, we didn't notice that when we bought it, and the seller wouldn't have noticed it either because it was covered in muck still. And if we put this on our bit of cowling here, probably hard to see on the video, but that doesn't actually match the profile of this bit of cowling, which from our experience of having to do lots of part swaps on these smaller Kohler K series engines with our 3 Ride-a-matics project and stuff like that, we found that there are multiple different kind of shapes for these backing plates and cowlings, which is quite unhelpful. This is the wrong one. So the best solution that we could come up with really is cannibalizing this spares engine that we've got, which we bought with one of our other Cub Cadet originals, and we got it from the same person that we got one of our other Cub Cadet originals from, just at a different time. And the reason I messed up there is because we believe this to be the original engine from that tractor, not just because of the paint. You can see on the exhaust here it's got the same 90-degree bend set up, literally identical to this engine we're working on currently, just a different can on it. And I don't think that's a coincidence really. And so the seller couldn't remember whether this was the original engine, but we believe it to be. And if you look at the backing plates, it is the exact same design as the one on this engine we're working on, just with that lobe still intact. So the plan is probably to take this off and put it on here. The only issue with that is the reason this engine is out of commission, which is, you can see there's quite a bit of movement there on the crankshaft, which is really not what you want. We've looked at this at some point in the past and we thought there was some issues with the crankshaft bearings, and we need to see whether that's caused any damage to this backing plate. If it hasn't, that's fine, we'll just whack it onto this engine we're working on. Otherwise, I think we're in a bit of trouble because we're not fully sure what to do. So it'll be a shame to cannibalize this engine, but we're probably going to have to for today, and then we'll see how far we get. So we've skipped ahead a bit to save some time, and we have stripped down this, well, what has become a donut engine, and taken off this bearing plate or backing plate, whatever you want to call it, and there doesn't appear to be any damage to it, so we're quite happy with this. And we've already punched out the oil seal that was in there, because obviously we don't want to reuse the one that's had all that crankshaft movement inside of it, and we've got new ones anyway, so we might as well switch one on while we're doing this. And our assumptions about these bearings were correct. As you can see, lots of movement in that, which you don't want to see. However, it does mean that this engine might have potential if those get switched. Depends if there's any other damage on this engine. That is a future project to look into. So now we're going to set about putting this onto this engine, and we skipped over taking it off the donor engine because we'll be showing you the process on this one. So to start with, we need to drain the oil before we start taking a panel off the side of the engine. I just start taking this off. Not quite full tightness yet. And see what comes out. Okay, when it comes to oil that we've seen, that is probably as good as we've seen from our second-hand tractors. The oil is all drained now, and with that done, we've tipped the engine on its side here so that it's a bit easier to work on when it comes to pulling this plate off. Now, before, when we'd been testing all of the coil and bits, we hadn't really touched a bit of tape that was around these three wires here, which we also just noticed as we were having a bit of a poke around. The red wire coming out of the coil becomes a much thicker gauge red wire after what was all of that tape. So we took that tape off, and you can see here there is a connection between those two wires, so it's been elongated effectively, but that's got a heat shrink over it. It's been done properly, because we were thinking at first that those two wires might have arced and then our coil might actually be alright, but that is not the case. But we know exactly why that is, because we've got experience with these from other engines. On these coils, the replacement coils, the red wires are shorter than the black ones, which means the red ones, which in theory should go to the condenser, don't reach. However, what we discovered is it doesn't actually matter which colour wire you put to the condenser, so you can use the black one to the condenser and then use the red one as the earth wire, which goes to that little bolt down there, which really isn't very far from the coil at all. So that's what we'll be doing with our replacement one. But for now, it's time to start unscrewing some things. We're going to leave the points wire attached to the points, so we've got this earth to disconnect here, take all of the connections off the condenser as well, and then disconnect the coil. And that appears to be too big of a screwdriver for that screw. We've disconnected all of the wires, including the one on the coil. So next, to take these clips off that hold the coil on, I'll kind of cover them with my hand so they don't go flying. That's one. You might be able to hear the RAF having a bit of a play in the background. Well, you definitely will now. But we can pull this off and out of the way now, and see if we can move this magnet ring. In theory, should be nothing holding it. I'm not going to put much force on it. I'm just going to give it a little bit of a lever. If this doesn't work, we'll have to work out how we're going to do it, although it does look like it's moving a little bit. It looked like it moved a little bit. Don't know. So it turns out, having looked on a flight tracker, that's actually the US Air Force, not the RAF, because we've got 2 US Air Force bases near us. Unfortunately, it's too cloudy outside to see what the planes are, and obviously that information isn't displayed on the flight tracker, but it's not too often that that happens. But anyway, we put some slightly larger screwdrivers on this, and that is off now. You can see all the copper slip that was put on there by a previous owner to make sure that didn't kind of rust on there or anything like that. Now we'll just take the 2 bolts off that hold this bracket on there. Put these in a metal dish actually. And this just lifts off here. You can see there's actually quite a lot of scratching and stuff around this bit. This backing plate is very beaten up anyway. And then it's just these 4 bolts which hold the backing plate onto the actual block, which I'll take off now. And after that, there's nothing else holding it on. It's just waiting for us to pull it off. With all of those bolts undone, we've just quickly pulled the wires out from there. And this is our puller setup, which is a harmonic balance puller with some threaded rod going into those threaded holes that are used to hold this bracket on, which we've used this kind of system before. We think on our 1961 Ride-a-matic in our 3 Ride-a-matics project. And that seemed to work quite well then, so we'll see if it works as well now. That should not be coming so easily. There's 2 possible things that could be happening when we do this. Either the bearing is moving along the crankshaft inside this plate, or the plate is sliding off of the bearing. Yeah, and that is very easy. I'm not sure I like how easy that is coming off. Okay, that's a bit more. Never mind. That is off. We will lift the whole lot off now to see what's left. Okay, it's left the bearing there, which is probably quite helpful for us. Let's have a look in there.
It looks as though that bearing has been turning on the plate, doesn't it? It's shiny.
Yeah, which that's really not helpful. So we cleaned up the contact surface there, which we did off camera because one of us was cleaning, the other one was there with the vacuum picking up any dust that was coming off. Then we've just sat a new gasket on there, as you can see. We've already tried the plate on the bearing and it is a nice tight fit, so that'll be an improvement. Solved a problem we didn't even realise was there, so that's handy. And this bearing is actually in good condition, so I'm not fully sure why that wasn't, or why that was turning in the wrong place. Who knows? But we've already put the wires through the bearing plate here, as you can see, and there is a third one now because we are fitting a stop switch to this tractor, which before, for some reason, it didn't have one. It should have one, so we're fitting it now. And I'll just quickly line this up on here. Gotta make sure the wires are kind of located in the right place, and just kind of shuffle this down a bit. Now when we get closer to the actual block, we can put the bolts through and draw on using the threads. However, until then, we're going to use a tool that we made up before for this very job, which is this kind of pipe looking thing. Sits on there, and then we can kind of gently and ideally evenly tap this down a bit until it's at a point where you can do that, which hopefully is soon. Now all these wires can get repositioned once this is fully on, but I will just try one of these bolts now. looking at it, it doesn't look like it'll reach. Might just about reach. It's almost there, but I'll give it a bit more. See if I can get these in now. Now just winding the bolts in, and the cameraman is holding the wires out of the way, so hopefully they won't get pinched. Let me know if you think it gets pinched.
Not yet.
We've got the plate fully bolted down now, and we've also fitted the oil seal. No video of that because someone gave me a really mucky bit of pipe to hit it down with, so that covered everything in muck, so we had to change tools. But now with that all together, it is just a case of rebuilding stuff that you saw us take off before, such as this bracket, the magnet ring, stuff like that. So we're going to skip ahead a little bit because otherwise you're just watching the same thing again until we're doing something new. So we fixed this bracket down, put the magnet ring on, and also fitted a new condenser. We don't know that anything was wrong with the old condenser, but we have these in stock, so we fitted a new one on there anyway. And now this red wire from the coil can fit to the earth point just there. The black wire will go to the condenser. The points wire will go to the condenser, and our new wire for our starter switch will also go to, or not starter switch, start stop switch will go to the condenser. However, well, then those clips can go on the coil as well to hold that on. However, before we do any of that, we need to put the HT lead onto the coil, because after we've done that, we obviously need to tape it up like this old one was, and you can't do that when it's mounted. So that's the first thing to do, is try to coil some of this wire around that loop on the coil, and then we're going to put a drop of solder on there as well, which we'll probably do without you because we hate soldering. So we will now do that and tape that up and come back to you in just a second. So it's not a couple of seconds later now, it's actually 2 days later, and the reason for that, once we'd soldered up the HT lead and taped it up, fitted the coil back on there, attached all of the wires and everything, so everything was connected up, and we tested the ignition system for a spark off camera just to make sure that everything was going in the right direction, and it wasn't. We didn't get a spark, so that's when we kind of went inside in frustration at the end of that day. And then the day after, which is now yesterday at the time of recording this clip, I had to do some schoolwork finishing off my application to Cambridge University. And then today we've spent all day trying to fix these problems, which we'll start off with the good news, which I'll show you now. As I hope you will have seen then, we now have a spark. So we've solved these ignition issues, and what we'll go through now is the painful journey that we went through to get to this stage, and let us know in the comments if you would have gotten there quicker, because I'm sure some of you probably would have. So the first thing we did was we peeled back the tape on the coil here and put our spark plug tester directly up to the terminal that's on there to skip out the HT lead, because it's quite an old component and we didn't want that affecting anything, and we still got no spark. So from there we switched the condenser, still no spark. We checked the points to see if they were earthing and then not connecting to earth as the points opened and closed, and that was all working as we would expect it to. And from there we did a resistance test on the coil to kind of compare it to the information we'd found online, that it should be between 7 and 10 kilo ohms, and this tested at 3.6 something kilo ohms, I think, which is the exact same to 2 decimal places. I can't remember exactly what the number was, but I remember they were exactly the same as this coil that we'd just taken off, which confused us a bit, because if they were both broken, then our brand new coil would be broken, and broken to the exact same extent as this one that would have been put on here by the looks of it maybe 15 years ago. So we thought that was a bit odd, and therefore we started changing some other bits with this coil still on there, which was the magnet ring. We switched with the one from this other Cub Cadet engine that we took the backing plate from, and we also switched the stator once that had made no difference, and neither of those components actually made a difference. We still had no spark. So at that point, having switched most of the components in the ignition system, we were getting quite frustrated by the fact that we were switching bits and nothing was happening. So we crawled right to the back of the workshop where this engine was being stored. This is the original from our orange 1962 Boland's Ride-a-matic, and despite it having a broken con rod, this has a working ignition system which, when you connect it all up, will produce a spark. So the first thing we did was just double check that it still had a spark from the last time we tested it, which it did, so we were happy there. First thing we did was move this coil across, because as you can see visually is a different kind of coil or different manufacturer. So we switched that over, having done a resistance test on this coil, which was about 6 kilo ohms resistance, I think, which is still not in the 7 to 10 range that we found online. So seeing as it worked on here and is outside of that range, we learnt that we shouldn't trust the internet. So we moved that coil over to here, and we were still getting no spark. So at that point we decided to do this a bit more radically, and we moved literally every ignition component that you see here over to the engine that we're working on, and then tested for a spark, and there wasn't one. So this is the bit where it got really confusing, because we've moved pretty much every ignition component over from an engine where there was a spark to a different one, and now suddenly there is no spark. The only thing we hadn't moved over was the points, because obviously we'd checked to see if the points were earthing and then not earthing as they opened and closed, and we thought that was enough. However, we thought just to be thorough, we would switch the points and the points bracket over from this engine to this engine that we're working on, and that's when we got the spark. So clearly the issue falls with the points and the points bracket, which, seeing as we put new points on at the very start of this journey, and seeing as we tested them to see if they earth or don't earth, we're not fully sure what's going on there, whether it's just not working under load or if there's some sort of issue with the points bracket itself. Don't know. It's stumped us really. However, since that worked, we kind of accepted that fact, and then one component at a time we switched things back to being the original bits from this engine out of our Cub Cadet original, and we're at a point now where it's literally every original component on here, all the replacement components that we've put on, like this coil or condenser, all of the stuff from the orange 62 is back on that engine, besides the points and the points bracket. And as you saw a minute ago, it sparks. So that was the issue, and that's taken us pretty much all day to get to this point. So the good news is we may well have another working coil here, which is good because they're not cheap, and especially when you have to ship these over from America every time you want one. Obviously we need to test it, but that'd be handy if that is a good working spare, because that means we've got 2 of them now, because obviously the one on this engine also works, so that's handy. And I'd say that was probably a valuable learning experience, going through the entire ignition system on one of these engines, especially with how many tractors we have with this style engine and ignition system. It's good to kind of know where the possible problems lie, because we hadn't even considered that whole points and points bracket nonsense before. So now obviously we've created quite a mess, so we need to have a bit of a clean up. First, that's getting thrown as far as we can throw it, and then we need to put that engine back together, chuck it back in the back of the workshop, bring all the tractors in that we had to take out to actually get to it, then put this engine back together, chuck that back where it belongs, and then have a tidy up of tools. And at that point the bench will actually be ready to do more work on this engine in the next video, which hopefully will be going back to mechanical stuff on this engine, where stuff actually makes sense rather than electrical stuff where you're just chucking stuff together and randomly it works, or doesn't work in our case. But yeah, that's pretty much where we're up to on this engine. Hopefully next time, with a bit of mechanical work, we can get to a stage where we can actually test it and see if it'll run. So that'll be exciting. But that is it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.